Right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. We are super excited that you've joined us for the Justice Education Series hosted by the Petey Greene program. In our audience today, I know we have some longtime friends and volunteers of the Petey Greene program alongside some new faces. So I just want to extend a very warm welcome to everyone. I think we're really going to have a great conversation tonight, and I'm really excited that you're all here. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Siobhan Cook, and I am the Volunteer Engagement and Organizational Learning Fellow here at the Petey Greene program. As many of you already know, the Petey Greene program is the largest multi-state provider of tutoring and college readiness programs in carceral spaces. We support the educational journeys of currently and formerly incarcerated learners in a range of programs in the Washington, D.C. area, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. The work we do to support the educational journeys of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated students is measurable and meaningful, and it's the foundation of what we do here at the PGP. But in addition to the work that we do inside facilities, there's also another component of our organization, and that is providing our volunteers and the wider community with the resources needed to understand the larger systems that contribute to mass incarceration in the United States, and to understand the impact that carceral systems have on individuals and the community. One way that we accomplish this goal is through programming like tonight's Justice Education Series webinar, Ecology in the Carceral State. Just as a reminder, for those of y'all who are just joining us, the way that this Zoom webinar is set up, we can't see or hear y'all, but you should be able to use the chat features. The plan tonight is to spend some time getting to know the work that our panelists are doing on environmental issues in carceral spaces, and then turn to audience questions. Don't feel like you need to wait until the end of our kind of discussion in order to submit your question. You can send it in at any time, and I'm going to try and leave us plenty of time for our panelists to answer those questions that y'all have. While I was selecting the topic for this spring's Justice Education Series, kind of starting last fall, I watched in kind of horror at some prisons and jails in Florida not evacuating despite being in the direct path of a major hurricane. Scroll to the next breaking news story a few months later, and we're watching wildfires raging in California, putting the lives of currently incarcerated people at risk. And we just kind of all watched these fires creep closer and closer to facilities that, again, weren't all evacuated, while simultaneously reading about incarcerated individuals working as frontline firefighters for like $10 a day. As a Texan, I've seen the strain that heat wave after heat wave puts on everyone, but especially incarcerated individuals, both in the short term and the long term. These sorts of environmental disasters are something that most of us have seen in some form or another. And recognizing the uneven burden that marginalized communities face, Black and Brown communities, working class communities, I wanted to learn more about what I was seeing in the news and to put it in context with the climate crisis and environmental issues in general. Things like air and water quality, access to fresh food, access to nature, environmental impacts of both the materials prisons are built out of and the spaces that they're built on. And so I wanted to bring together some of the amazing folks working on all sides of this issue here to talk with us at the Petey Greene program to better understand how environmental issues intersect with the carceral system. And so I am going to introduce our three panelists that we have here tonight. They come at this issue from a wide range of angles, all with the core understanding that environmental justice is intersectional and requires attention to marginalized communities that have historically been left out of environmental movements. So first off, I'd like to introduce Ufoma Ovenmida. Ufoma is an engineer by education and environmental justice geographer by training, generating data-driven, actionable insights about the environmental burdens experienced by marginalized identities in the United States. Her current work focuses on communities impacted by incarceration. Currently, she is a Baker-endowed postdoctoral research associate in climate change and human resiliency at the University of Arizona. Next, we have Ivy Harris. Ivy is an advocate for environmental justice and criminal legal reform as the project manager for Land Together, formerly the Insight Garden program. They lead prison-based rehabilitation through environmental education. Previously, they've supported system-impacted individuals at the LA Public Defender's Office and advanced equity initiatives in community spaces and local government. And finally, we have Richard Thomas. Richard is an abolitionist, an educator, a theologian, and an organizer. He's particularly focused on dismantling the connections between the prison system, policing, and school districts. To that end, he's developed abolitionist workshops focused on school safety and continues to be deeply involved in youth-led movements to free Palestine and build ethnic studies in Texas. Richard is a proud member of Canopy Movement Consultants and Fight Toxic Prisons. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. And to get us started, I'd love for each of you to tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing and or a bit about how your organization came into being. Let's start with you, Ufoma.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. So yeah, a bit about myself. I'm primarily an academic. I finished my PhD last year and then now I'm a postdoc. But the work that I'm doing here, great to see Richard, who's been a longtime collaborator now for like 5 years. During my PhD, I learned about this intersection of environmental hazards in prisons and kind of on the side, I was doing organizing around kind of anti-police movements on college campuses. Um, and I was just really excited about the opportunity to try and apply my research to this context. And then I met Fight Toxic Prisons in early 2021. And since then, we've been collaborating on opportunities to use geospatial data science to map the environmental hazards that incarcerated people face. Um, and and this was kind of just leveraging the background that I already had doing remote sensing and data science. And it, yeah, just blossomed into what I think is a really cool and beautiful project. It's called the Toxic Prisons Mapping Project. Siobhan, is this a good time to share it, or what do you think? Okay, cool.
Sure, go for it.
Okay. Yeah, so and I'm sure Richard will maybe have more to add here because this is collaborative work over the last 4 years. But the Toxic Prisons Mapping Project, I'm just going to play this demo. You can visit it at toxicprisons.com. And the purpose behind this was to really create a participatory research initiative to map the environmental hazards that prisons, jails, and detention centers face. And as an overview, there's 3 tabs behind the tool or that are part of the tool. And I'll click through each of them and just share a high level. In the hazards tab, this is where we visualize real-time and forecasted environmental hazards on top of this layer of carceral facilities. So you can toggle on different environmental indicators such as air quality. You can also visualize active wildfires and forecasted tracks for hurricanes. And the intention behind this tab is that if you have a loved one inside at a facility, you can use this to keep tabs at the conditions that they're facing and maybe use that to inform when you send in additional resources for commissary for purchasing water, a fan, or if you're an organizer, you can use this to plan interventions. In the Insights tab, this is where we have time series information on socio-demographic and environmental indicators, and you can aggregate this information across like several states, or you can look at individual prisons, and then you'll be able to see statistics and information about that specific facility as shown here. And then fast forwarding a little bit through this demo, here's time series information about this specific facility in Georgia. Um, and then lastly, we have the fast forwarding a bit more, the storytelling tab, which is my favorite. And this is where we feature both written and audio narratives of formerly incarcerated people, as well as loved ones who have people inside talking about exposures and their experience with toxic prisons. And this is where, especially this collaboration with Fight Toxic Prisons has been really meaningful through their broader network of directly impacted people. We co-conducted interviews over the last few years, and I'll leave it to Richard to touch more on that. And I'll just play this example of one audio clip. Hopefully it comes through.
My stepson, he was at Pulaski, and he had a disciplinary and was put into lockup at the Pulaski unit. He was put into the unit. They remove all your property. So they take your property when you get in trouble. And he was put in there with no mattress and no fan. And it was, upward of 96 degrees, heat indices over 100 in that area.
And so, yeah, and it was really important for us to include this to, really pair the quantitative information with this qualitative storytelling information that you can't capture from geospatial data most of the time. And I'll pause there. And yeah, feel free to visit the website, visit the contact page if you want to hear more about the work or get involved.
Perfect, thanks. Richard, do you want to go next since y'all's work is kind of related?
Sure, no problem. So if there's any background noise, pardon the background noise. At my mom's house right now. I'm on spring break. So it's a fairly small space, but I'll introduce myself again. My name's Richie. I'm an organizer with Fight Toxic Prisons, and I work with Canopy Movement Consulting. My thing that I do before every talk, I say this. Daytime, I'm a public educator because I work at a high school in Texas. Nighttime, weekends, and now I'm doing spring break. I'm an abolitionist organizer. So it's spring break. It's time to get my abolitionist organizing on, y'all. So uh so for me, like organizing, especially at the intersection of what we're doing now, started with Fight Toxic Prisons in around 2015. In 2015, there was a major fight for the planned construction of a multi-billion-dollar prison in Letcher County, Kentucky. So that's where Fight Toxic Prisons work started. But the specific intersection that brings me here today developed several years later, um, bringing folks from the movement of abolition to liberation movement to queer studies movements to a variety of other liberatory movements became a place. Fight Toxic Prisons became a place for a lot of those things to come together. But around 2017, we got involved a lot more with some of that intersections with hurricanes and disasters and things like that. I want to say it was at Hurricane Harvey and Beaumont. One of the things that happened at Beaumont, we had gotten reports of like people dying from like lack of access to water or having contaminated water. Um, there's a lot of stories to read about those things, but like from those stories, it kind of like put the Fight Toxic Prisons crew, like it put what was happening in prisons in perspective. We'd already been doing a lot of this work situated with like environmental disasters and what was happening in terms of like toxicity and all sorts of different levels. And I can explain more about that later. But like it became imminent that no folks were doing work on the ground to like evacuate incarcerated folks during like disaster season, specifically during hurricane season. So like the first year, 2018, me and my best friend Jordy, we literally sat on their mom's back porch looking at maps. And for record, I have a master's degree in history and a master's degree in theology. None of those things have anything to do with geography or geology and mapping. So, like, what we ended up doing, but I do know prisons though. I know prisons and facilities, so I don't know anything about maps, but I can trace prisons and different carceral facilities. So what we ended up doing, we ended up taking some stuff from the Prison Ecology Project and one of the EPA studies to kind of like, plus just different weather reports that we had got that we're getting online and news reporters who had like written stories about like hurricanes hitting different carceral facilities. So we used a lot of that for our initial research. And again, happy to give a lot more specifics on how all those things happen a little bit later. But to make a long story short, like those like that those early incidents, uh, it got us to really realize that like a good bit of the abolition work that we do is literally helping to provide material needs for currently incarcerated folks. And one of those is literally just like evacuation, getting folks out of there. So we organized phone zaps. We organized some phone zaps to get several different facilities, and we've had varying rates of success with some of those. We've also developed mutual aid systems to get water and other supplies and commissaries to currently incarcerated folks based on that work. And that actually led to the work with UFOMA and a lot of other really dope comrades who have a much more robust understanding and expertise in the mapping portions of it. So now we've built out like this mapping project that's actually being used by our disaster response team so that we're able to respond to not only hurricanes, but we're also trying to be more responsive to other different types of disasters such as flooding. And in Texas, something that's very deeply important to me is global warming, global heat change. The massive heat disparities, like you heard in that video or in that small clip, where it can get up to hundreds of degrees in the summertime, where people literally burn, where people literally die from heat exhaustion and many other things. So that's like a very brief introduction to me. Hopefully, we'll have more conversation.
Thanks so much, Richie. And Ivy, tell us a little bit.
Hello, so my name is Ivy, and I'm going to share a little bit of a background about myself, how I ended up in this work, share information about the organization that I work with, Land Together, and the work that we do. So I am a former Berkeley graduate studying global environmental policy and politics, and really over several years have spent a lot of my time in the environmental justice and food justice field in Oakland, the East Bay, Los Angeles, and my hometown of Temecula. I always, felt a strong connection with the community that could be built within gardens, and really being an individual who could help facilitate a connection for people of color, low-income people of color, to healthy natural spaces through very unique circumstances. I ended up at the Compton Public Defender's Office, working for the organization Partners for Justice and Holistic Defense. And while I was doing that work, I went back to what I knew, and I began working with the Compton Community Garden. I became a director there. And as I was working intimately with clients of the Public Defender's Office, some of the most vulnerable individuals within that community, and I was working with the garden, I saw an opportunity, right? I saw an opportunity for healing, for connection, and I saw the intersection there. Those that were disproportionately affected by the carceral state, that were affected by heavy policing, were also the individuals that were stripped from access to healthy green spaces, but were also stripped from access to healthy food. So I began exploring the possibility of integrating my clients' healing journey, my clients' freedom stories with access to this garden space, and through organizing workshops, I actually met the individual who would connect me with the organization Land Together, where I work now. So, Land Together, which is formerly known as Inside Garden Program, was established in 2002 when our founder toured San Quentin and was asked to build a garden there. This eventually led to weekly classes that discussed environmental awareness, and it's been now 20 years, and Land Together is still growing massively and cultivating justice and belonging and nurturing deep connections for our incarcerated and formerly incarcerated participants to nature, self, community. And, we are one of the only organizations out there right now that is really working with the intersection of environmental justice and criminal justice reform through in-prison programming, That is primarily what we do, but also reentry programming and services, community building, advocacy initiatives. So ultimately, we could facilitate our larger goal, which is bringing people together to grow and heal and cultivate community. So I'll expand a little bit more about what we do. A huge part is our in-prison programming. We're currently located in 9 prisons, serving 450 participants per year. That we facilitate a 48-week curriculum utilizing inner and outer gardening, which blends environmental stewardship and mindfulness educations with hands-on permaculture gardening, landscape design, and vocational training. So there's that huge component, but also the one that's closest to myself is that we have the ability to really foster the interconnection between humans, our participants, and nature. And when you do that, you end up leading people to have a relationship with nature in which they feel like stewards. They feel like heroes, like they want to protect the environment. They are the protectors. So we are seeing our participants grow into these amazing environmental advocates, and stewards of the land, but also these amazing advocates for their communities when they realize how much we rely upon and how much we can do for the environment that we experience around us. So I think what sets us apart as an organization really thinking about environmental justice within prisons is our proximity, right? As program managers, we are in the prison every single week working with incarcerated folks. Our groups range to about 20 to 25 incarcerated individuals, and we are there with them at the time, hearing the hands-on, experiences that they're having. So if there's an extreme heat wave, sometimes we're out there in 106 degrees. We're having the conversation where they're saying, I don't have a fan. It's too hot in my room, right? We're there when it's extremely cold and it's raining and their rooms are flooded out. And we might have participants who are coming after spending the entire night pushing water out of their room, but still making sure that they have time to come and to do programming. We get to see hands-on the impact that climate change is having on incarcerated individuals. And I think that puts us in a very interesting position to find solutions. So, on top of in-person programming, we also have reentry services where we served over 200 reentry participants annually. We do. And we also have a component of our work that's advocacy, coalition building, and technical assistance, where we're able to influence policy practices and cultural shifts within the prison organizations and government agencies that serve incarcerated and system impacted folks. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I really love how multifaceted the group that we have here today is. Y'all are really working at different kind of scales of the issue and around different solutions to the problem of kind of environmental issues in its most broad sense. Something that came up in kind of all three of y'all's discussions or introductions was the role that people directly impacted by the carceral system are playing in these movements. And so I want to talk a little bit about that aspect. We know that centering the insights of folks directly impacted by the carceral system is incredibly important because we know that those closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. So I just wanted to allow y'all to draw on that idea a little bit more on what role do formerly or currently incarcerated folks play in the work that you do. But before I turn that over to y'all, I do want to just note I'm sorry that I said something confusing about the chat being enabled, but it's actually the Q&A that participants or that audience members are able to put their comments in. So just as a quick note, we know the chat's disabled, but use the Q&A if you have a question. But again, what role do formerly or currently incarcerated folks play in the work that y'all are doing right now? We can start with whoever would like to.
I can go. So yeah, I think for me, it's been really important part of the work. Um, Academics historically and contemporarily have a bad habit of extracting from people, including community organizers, including people who are directly impacted by environmental justice issues, and getting their publications written, getting them out, and then kind of disappearing because it's an interesting topic, and then moving on without doing kind of some of the deeper work. And I don't think I've been perfect at it by any means, but it has been really important for me to really align any research product that I'm doing with direct asks from community organizers as well as people who are inside. And a lot of community organizers have themselves been directly impacted by incarceration in the past. Um, and so, yeah, I really tried to allow that to guide my work as well as how I present results, and framing things to the best of my ability to support the narratives in this movement building rather than hampering them. So, to give an example of kind of the difference of a methodological approach that an academic might reach if they were removed from talking to people who are inside. When you think of the issue of extreme heat, a lot of us, are probably like, yeah, let's, we love that we have air conditioning. A lot of us have the privilege and access to air conditioning, and that, solves the problem for a lot of free people. But a narrative that I wouldn't have heard without talking to people who had been formerly incarcerated was the fact that even in facilities that have AC, that AC can be used as punishment. So blasted at really low levels, 40, 50 degrees, especially in solitary confinement, and used to punish people. Or another person just who was in a Texas prison, a Clemens prison, described how there was a designated part of the unit that had AC, and in theory, by policy, the people were supposed to be able to access it 24/7, and they just needed to ask a guard. But this person described how the guard would literally laugh in their faces and not open the cell to escort them. And so I think that's a dimension of that really highlights why it's important to talk to and involve directly impacted people in any kind of data-driven work or communication of those results, because again, kind of from a purely academic perspective, one might say, oh, it's hot, and in general in the population, AC is the best, solution to solve that. But when you center, those directly impacted, you see that that's not going to be enough to actually reach those who are at the margins in this issue. So that's just one example that's come up in kind of my line of work.
Ivy or Richie, do y'all want to add anything to this idea of being attentive to centering those experiences of the people most directly impacted?
So I'll hop on and I'll just say that Land Together as an organization is led by formerly incarcerated and system impacted individuals. So our leaders within our organization understand deeply the issues the issues that incarcerated folks experience in all breadths of their incarceration, right? But also a huge component of our work as program managers within the prison is to uphold the dignity and agency of our participants. And although we're curriculum based with like as facilitators, there comes this implied leadership, right? Position, implied hierarchy, but we really understand and recognize that our participants have like a level of wisdom, bravery, and resilience. We understand that each individual comes with their own expertise, experiences, and knowledges that can contribute to understanding our collective place on the earth, but also finding solutions to these immense challenges and institutional barriers that persist within prisons. So as we think, and I'll explain more later, and as we create the prison advisory board that is formed by formerly incarcerated individuals, we really tap into that wisdom, that resilience, as we explore solutions to the disproportionate impacts of climate change on incarcerated folks.
Perfect. Thank y'all so much. I want to kind of turn to the challenges of the work that y'all do. Anyone who works in and around carceral spaces knows that this work is often really demanding and difficult. It kind of forces us to engage with systems that can be really tough to create change in. There's a lot of bureaucracy or a lot of like barriers to creating the change that we want to see. And so I was hoping that y'all could speak a little bit to some of the biggest challenges of your work and how you negotiate them. Ufoma, we'll start with you again.
I think a present challenge is resources. Um, you know, obviously, a lot of people have been doing great community organizing work without the support of the federal government or state governments for decades, right? Centuries. But we're also just coming off of a nice-ish era of having a lot of government supported, at least at face value, resources for environmental justice related work. So that's a very present challenge right now of something that I've always prioritized in my work, in working with community organizers who are, doing so much labor for free, or people who are taking their time to speak to us, is paying people. And I can no longer do that, and I can no longer guarantee that. And so for me, that's a moment of like, okay, I need to probably step back, right? If I can't actually financially support the people who are helping to keep this work centered around the perspectives of those most directly impacted, I probably need to step back in some ways. So that's one present challenge. I think um, other challenges, again, maybe just speaking from the academic perspective, is probably just trust building. And again, something I take seriously. And yeah, it took a while, whether it's with FTP or with people that we've interviewed, feeling scared and worried, like how is what they share going to be used against them somehow? Is it going to be misinterpreted or manipulated? And in response to that one, at least something that we tried to put structurally in place um, was really from front to end or whatever with the interview process was we had consent forms. We took the time to try to explain that to people so they knew what they were consenting to. We provided a range of options of anonymity. So, for example, in the tool, you'll see some people who wanted, to be anonymous for obvious reasons, but there's some people who like really wanted to be identified actually because it was one opportunity to reclaim kind of agency about an area of their life and over their narrative, especially when coming from the carceral system that strips so much agency away from people. Then even after the fact, after we kind of, worked with the interview data and to identify clips to include in the tool, we could have just said, oh, we already have their consent. It's fine, let's publish it. But we did another round of then sharing with people, hey, these are the clips that we're planning to use. are you still okay with this? And in that process, some people revoked, consent or said, oh, no, actually, I want to edit this. And that was fine. And that was something we were willing to be flexible for. But I guess the challenge in this is just like the the level of effort needed to do this work well, but it's important. So I don't consider it as like a challenge in like a bad way, but more so something that I'm happy to rise to the occasion for.
Perfect. Thank you. Ivy, challenges?
Of working within a prison? I mean, the list is endless. But I think I want to start off positively, um, which is when it comes to facilitating programming, I'm currently at a level 4 men's prison. Um, it is never my participants. And people, when I share that with some people who've never worked on the inside, they're like, what are you talking about? Like, it's scary, big bad wolf, all these things, which, I mean, prisons are scary. That's what they're supposed to be for anyone who walks into that space. There's a very there is an intentionality behind the structure of a prison, and that's to create bodily responses, right? Of fear, of subjugation. That's just within the structure. That's not even talking about the people. So yes, that exist, or I don't want to say the people, that's not even talking about the administration there. So with my participants, um, like I said, there's just such a wealth of wisdom, compassion, and I think such a unique ability I feel like I have to see what is most important for individuals when they're stripped of everything, and they create their own dignity and they create their own community, and you see what really matters to people. That that's the blessing of being within a prison is perspective. Difficult part, dealing with prison bureaucracy. Um, it's horrific. It is an oppressive structure. Um, I don't want to go too deep in it. I don't know how much of a safe space this is recording. This is recording, but very earnestly, it's akin to chattel slavery when I experience inside. That could be really difficult on the body to experience, but all that form of oppression exists in every interaction, not every, but in a lot of interactions that you have with prison staff. I can't speak to what it's like to being in a prison every single day, but communication can be very dehumanizing. And ultimately, sometimes when it comes to organizing, planning to do things for our participants, trying to bring in a level of humanity into a dehumanizing space is incredibly difficult. How do you navigate it? I wish that I could bring you a program provider that could give you 100% of the answer on how to do that, a strategic plan, but it really just has to be within you. You have to have a resiliency within you, but also that comes from a clear vision of what you're doing, a clear understanding that everyone deserves a level of dignity. Um, People are capable of rehabilitation, and that even if you're dealing with individuals who will never leave that prison, they're still capable of purpose and of doing amazing and wonderful things within that space. We know when we walk by somebody and they smile at us and we're having a shitty day and they're like, "Hi, how are you doing?" Sometimes that's just like, I needed that. Or sometimes you come across a stranger when you're feeling terrible and they might give you insight and that might change your day. When you have individuals within prison who are thinking more positively about life and how we interact with each other, they share that with the community. It's not about the individual, it's about the community. So, how do you navigate the barriers? How do you navigate the difficulties? You just stand strong. And I know I feel this with the other program managers. You stand strong in your belief, and your belief is that humans are deserving of care and dignity. And that means you'll be talked crazy to by prison staff, and you'll be dehumanized, and you'll experience the things, and you'll experience the trauma, and you'll do, you'll have that, but you get to leave. You get to leave. So you take it and you fight, not physically, but you fight. You fight the bureaucracy. That's what we're here for. So yeah, that's the things.
Thank you so much for that, Ivy. Richie, we were discussing what are some of the like biggest challenges in the work that you do, and that can be taken in any direction, but specifically, like what is challenging about working on prison issues, and how do you navigate those challenges? If you want to jump in.
Sure. I think so. I'm assuming everybody has already hit on this one, but literal state repression is one of the biggest challenges from dealing with like the work that like we do. So I'll actually let me concretize this a little bit in terms of like the disaster response work that we do. So one thing that we do is that like uh we strongly believe in Fight Talks with Prison, and all the organizing that I do is that we're not advocates, because folks on the inside, they can advocate for themselves. So like happy to give a whole different talk on what it means to be in deep solidarity with our homies and the folks on the inside. But for the scope of this conversation, oftentimes what we do is guided by folks on the inside. And it's folks on the inside, but it's also loved ones too, who give us information and reports about different things that might be happening at a facility. So, how does that play out in terms of like state repression? Whether it be water conditions or it be during like an environment during like hurricane season, or like something in Texas that we dealt with a couple years ago was the infestation of H. pylori in the water in several different facilities. There's also I think there was a fungus that actually ate at people's brains 2 years ago that we organized folks against, that we worked on a phone app for, and there's some other organizing things. But in each of those situations, like state repression can take several different forms. One, it can literally be like in the denial by like not like it can be the denial by institutions on what's actually happening at those facilities. And something that we saw in COVID during the height of the COVID epidemic is that oftentimes, in response to reports or calls from folks on the inside to evacuate, what facilities would do, they would put entire facilities on lockdown, but they were on indefinite lockdown. So one place may be locked down for 2 weeks, another may be 18 weeks, another might be 6 to 8 months. It really just depended. But the solution, rather than resolving any of the institutional problems or any of those other issues the state came up with, was simply punishing those who are currently incarcerated even more. And I think like another like aside to that, in terms of like where does repression fit in? Some facilities that we've called for evacuations for during COVID and even post-COVID, whenever folks have been evacuated, it's not always just about those evacuations. It's about where people being evacuated into as well. Like we've gotten firsthand accounts that folks were evacuated from Texas prisons for during hurricane seeding and for potential floods, but they're all thrown into around 10,000 people were thrown into a gym that fits no more than 300 people. And all they got for food was peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, moldy peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So like there's that end of it in terms of like state repression on what they literally do, but also many of our comrades on the inside, they literally risk their lives whenever they report particular environmental conditions. Whether they do it via phone call or through a letter to the loved ones that they then give to us. Uh, the state, like those reports literally put them in jeopardy because they may, because of them reporting particular issue, they may be ADSEG or they may be, or another word for that is solitary confinement. So they may be cut off from everybody else for another indefinite amount of time. And when they cut off, they usually don't get any of the food, water resources. And I'm sure folks are familiar with the mental health component of all those different things. So like that's another bit where folks or our homies are literally risking their lives when they're reporting these things. And then I think the last thing I wanted to point out in terms of like what happens with like state repression, it's not necessarily just about like false reports. It's the like solutions that aren't really solutions that often happens too. So let's say like the issue was something like air conditioning. Rather than giving folks air conditioning in all different carceral facilities, like in Texas, one of the solutions has been to build more new and upgraded prisons. But even in those like proposals, the proposal isn't to build those with air conditioning. You just need better facilities, right? Um, so that's kind of like one end of it. And I think one of the end results that often has happened, like with a lot of our correspondence with like the repression piece, is that folks on the inside, there's a big battle in Texas. I think it's in Florida and several other states too, about getting access to mail. If you complain about if you write a letter to your loved one or to an org or somebody about conditions that's facing it in a facility, you literally lose your privilege to write letters. And then I think statewide, what Texas has done now is that instead of being able to send individual letters to folks, as been possible in the past years, I think everything gets centralized in the Dallas office. If I'm not mistaken, I might have the exact location wrong. But rather than being able to send physical letters in Texas, you can send your JPay message, but it only goes now as an electronic message, and that's all, and that's like very specifically used as a tool of repression. So that's like for me, that's definitely the biggest challenge is like the potential for the potential for retaliation for folks on the inside, plus like little not necessarily little, but um, but ranging in severity from the way that folks are dealt with regarding some of those things. Like some folks have lost access to medication because they've decided to like speak out against environmental conditions. And one of my close homies, I wasn't able to talk to him for like almost 8 full months because he filed a complaint. And then, without even telling his family or anybody, they literally shipped him away to another facility where he was in solitary for a good 6 months or so. And like, yeah, so I'm not gonna go into the full details on all those because I do realize this is all being recorded. So like I'll leave that story there. Um, yeah. So I guess what was the other part of that? I think that was a
No, I
lot
think you
on
got it. No,
that was
Richie,
a
thank
lot on
you.
the
No, thank you so much. And I think that all of y'all raise really important challenges. But obviously, all of us do believe in the work. And so those challenges don't keep us from doing it. And I think that, that is something that, yeah, go for it, Richie.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, like, despite I don't want to end that like train of thought with all the negative pieces of it. So like I want to be like my colleague Ivy and like hint at a little bit of like where does our hope lie? What are those things that we can do like in spite of some of those things? And one of those things that like Fight Toxic Prison's done that I've done is um, just as the solution like can't come from the state because the state does all these different things, like if we develop intentional, deep solidarity with each other, whether it be through folks on the outside, folks on the inside. If we develop that deep sense of solidarity, we can work and create strategies that can not just better folks' lives, but also can improve all of our communities as a whole. And one of those ways that we've done that, we've done very creative things in terms of how we've gotten in survey data and letters to folks. Like, I have a master's degree in religion. So one thing that I will do occasionally is use a religious organization and as a way to use a religious organization and to ask questions about prison conditions and stuff like that, or work with local organizations to get water in. There's an organization in Texas called Sodejo Ministries that we've worked with, that Fight Texas Prisons has worked with in the past to get water into different carceral facilities. So that's one very specific example. But I think as long as we are creative and we work together and we have a deep sense of solidarity, there's a variety of different ways that we can use to not just improve people's physical and living conditions, but also make these substantial changes to our communities as a whole.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and start turning to questions. I had many, but I think that our audience has some really great ones. This one's for you, Ivy. Lynn wants to know the food that's produced from the gardens, who's able to enjoy that food? In some of Massachusetts prisons, only people serving life can work in the garden. So how does that work in the California prisons that you're working in?
So it varies from prison to prison. So in some prisons, we're able to produce different veggies and fruits that the participants may be able to experience, that may be able to eat while we're in the garden. Our overall goal would be to be able to provide produce to the prison to feed the population. But right now, you work within the constraints of CDCR in California. And we just feel really lucky that within those particular prisons, we're able to do that. Like in my prison right now, we're not growing food. We're able to grow different flowers and herbs and things like that. It varies from prison to prison. But at our women's prison, we are now having a farmer's market. And we just had a farmer's market in February, the first of its kind, where we were able to organize, or the program manager there was able to organize donations from different farmers and from different local produce owners to donate this produce to the prison. And each incarcerated individual was given 2 tickets, and they were able to grab whatever produce that 2 pieces of whatever produce they wanted. So we were able to see that happen. And that, I like to use the word radical, that was really radical within that space. And now they're going to be hosting another one in May and sending out invitations. And we're hoping to enact that in all the prisons that we're in eventually, right? Creating these makeshift farmers markets where incarcerated folks have access to fresh produce.
It's amazing. Thank you. I think this one's for Ufoma and maybe Richie also. So Andy notes that these data-driven approaches are so important for flagging environmental crises and supporting the needs of currently incarcerated people. What types of data would you be interested in integrating into your map in the future? For example, the evolution and spread of infectious diseases that are linked with climate change, and these infections disproportionately affecting incarcerated people.
Yeah, so I think the short answer to this is that we very much describe the version of this tool right now as a beta, as in a prototype. And so it's something that was the result of multiple focus groups with formerly incarcerated people, interviews, and then years of participatory technology development with Fight Toxic Prisons. So it has been informed by people's perspectives, but of course you can always iterate and improve things. So part of what we plan to do in the coming months, years is to basically demo the tool with different stakeholder groups and get feedback, direct feedback on the types of data indicators that people want to see. Of course, we have our own ideas, but we really want to prioritize the things that are kind of, most timely or relevant to people's different kind of organizing context. So that's like a high level answer, but to like get more specific, some things that we're exploring are like past inundation, flood inundation, like mapping that, health data, so attaching like mortality data, and so many things that are so important. I will say on the health side, that's a immense challenge due to this, state repression piece that both Ivy and Richie were talking about of like some facilities literally not making mortality data publicly available. And just the lack of transparency around that. And then even further, there's mortality as kind of course, the most horrific outcome, but there's so many illnesses and diseases that are so much less documented in any sort of kind of official data. So that part is hard to datafy in a tool, but that's why we include those narratives to hear people talk about how these exposures to environmental hazards gave them cancer and gastrointestinal diseases, how they had friends inside who died from these different things. So it's somewhere that is like, data science has a very clear limitation for sharing certain types of conditions and experiences, and that's where this qualitative, this storytelling data from people who are directly impacted is so important to really supplement that and share a more complete story as much as we can.
Pretty much what the last part is pretty much what I was gonna hit on, Ufoma. It's just for me a big part of the mapping project is much like Ufoma, my favorite part is the qualitative storytelling piece. So one thing that I would like to see like that we can do as we further expand this out is getting more stories about more facilities and getting some more of like we've only kind of like scratched the surface of the different types of environmental disasters that folks face. And oftentimes like folks get lost in the sauce and think of those environmental disasters purely from like the physical aspect. But like it's very like one of the things that came across from a lot of the interviews that we had is that folks gave not only stuff about the environmental disasters that impacted like the facilities, they gave a lot of really impactful details about the psychological and the sociological impact, the disaster that happens with that to folks who are currently incarcerated. So even if we so this is like folks like I'm gonna preach abolition to like forever. So so this is like a lot of those stories is why I continue to strongly push abolition in every space that we're in. Because even if we had a perfect space where like these facilities where everybody had air conditioning, where everybody had like all the conditions to meet their everyday lives, the very fact of that carceral facility itself, that's inherently toxic. And that kind of came, and that didn't kind of, that absolutely came across through many of the interviews that we had. So, like to kind of sum that up, like short is like getting a more robust qualitative data set from like some of those interviews because we interviewed a good bit of people, but if you didn't know, America is pretty big, has a lot of different carceral facilities. We're mainly able to focus on like federal facilities, and I think we might. Did we have any state institutions, Ufoma, or
We
was
had
it
a lot of
only
state
fed?
institutions. Yeah, I
Okay,
think it was actually majority state, maybe. I don't know.
okay, yes, yeah, yeah. a lot of things. There's a lot of things rolling in my head, but yeah, I think my point being that we focus very heavily on like state level and federal facilities, but things that we didn't actually get to focus a ton on because it just was outside the scope of our work. Detention centers, juvenile justice facilities, and then a variety of carceral facilities that aren't even named as carceral facilities, but have but have the exact same function as those facilities. So like I guess just having like a more robust map of some of those stories to like really preach that bit about like how like the name of the Toxic Prisons Project, how toxic all those facilities really are. And it goes beyond just the environmental and the physical aspect of those spaces.
I love that, Richie. And I think that, yeah, thinking broader about like what we mean when we talk about environmental injustice, or thinking broader about what we mean by environmental impact is such an important intervention in that all of us here on the outside can really learn from and use that to interrogate, the systems that we interact with every day or that we kind of unknowingly participate in. I want to go back to Ivy, and this question came from Joseph, and maybe this is actually for anyone, but I think it mostly pertains to Ivy's work with Land Together. But Joseph asks, does anyone integrate nature and library activities? In other words, has anyone created a library with plants, wood, etc., and how this might provide an environment that engenders reading and learning and this connection to nature that I know Land Together is really focused on.
So, in terms of creating as I'm understanding, it's a nature library.
Yes, I think that's what he was kind of asking about.
Okay. Um, I don't think that we've integrated a nature library into the formal work that we're doing. Um, but I can only reflect on my own experience within this space. I think it's a brilliant idea because there's so much interest for my guys. When I come in, I oftentimes bring environmental books with me. I can't allow them to take them, but I bring an array of books with me that in the extra time that I'm there, like the first beginnings of class, they've all been in class where they're just like able to check out the books, able to check out the chapters. I have one particular individual who isn't a participant, but is a friend of Land Together, who is an incarcerated individual who make sure that they come 10 minutes before my class to read the same book that I bring in by Leah Penniman, that is Farming While Black. And he reads it because he aspires to, when he is released, to go out and create his own farm. Right. So I think that's an absolutely brilliant idea to have this nature library and to have particular books that are focused on just that information. Um, and I see a deep desire for my guys that I'm working with in that particular field. And yeah, and through that creation of environmental stewards, through those books, um, we're seeing a lot of advocacy from that. And in creating these environmental advocates, we're able to integrate them into the program that we've built. And I do want to add that in. I feel like I want to take the time to speak about what we're doing at Land Together, aside from the in-person programming. That is focused primarily on addressing the impact of climate change on incarcerated individuals. So in April, we created a prison environmental advisory board in partnership with the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, which we build the capacity of people in prison and reentry to have a meaningful voice in government and decision-making processes related to environmental and climate justice issues. Um, I believe the link is dropped below. So we are able to connect formerly incarcerated individuals to nonprofit partners, stakeholders in government, philanthropy, private industry, and discuss how climate change impacts incarcerated people and offers them recommendations to improve conditions uh, for individuals on the outside. But also, I would be remiss in not adding that low-income people of color are former participants, formerly incarcerated individuals, are going back to communities that are disproportionately affected by climate change as well. So, two-edged sword, right? And I know what people might be asking. What does that have to do with the initial question, right? The environmental library. But through our work and through at least myself, I know this kind of environmental education, Land Together really focuses on building up environmental stewards, environmental advocates. And aside from the in-prison programming, now we have this amazing opportunity on the outside for our former participants, but also just other formerly incarcerated folks to participate in advocating for individuals who are on the inside, right? We've given them the tools, and we're going to provide them the tools too for those who haven't participated in our program to be able to speak to their experience, right? To speak for others and really to nail it in the head, the interconnection between the environment and those who've been disproportionately harmed by the effects of climate change and disproportionately harmed by institutions on the outside. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Foma, there's like three interlocking questions that folks have asked, and so I'm going to try and rope them all together. So the first one has to do with for people in academia who are in the hard sciences, if what can people in that space be doing to further this fight? If not through research directly, are there things that they could be doing? Relatedly, or on the flip side, Caden asks whether you've experienced pushback. So we've got this like, what can we be doing? But also like, have you experienced like resistance to people from people in academia for doing this research? And I don't think I can fit the third one in. We'll just stick with those two.
What was the third one? Try me.
Let's see. It was about, oh man, I've lost it now.
Was it, from Kaya or
Maybe. Oh, yes, it was from Kaya
okay.
about
Yeah.
can these be used to leverage to impact prison closures or lawsuits?
Yeah.
Yes, that was the third one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I wrote all of those down. So I'll start with the last one. That's the goal. We just launched this in September or October. And we're still kind of in a mode of just like sharing it with community organizers and the people who are going to be part of the movements to actually try and get prisons closed or achieve certain interventions. But that's absolutely the goal. Especially thinking about, for example, the Insights tab, where we have, time series indicators on a range of sociodemographic and environmental indicators. My hope is that, people can use that to say, hey, in the state of California or Georgia or Texas, like these are the top three, prisons that have the worst environmental indicator, and then contextualize that with additional things on other conditions, psychological conditions, et cetera, in those facilities, and use that kind of information to essentially prioritize and build out campaigns with this, environmental information in mind. So that's kind of one way that I could see this being used. Will it be used? We'll see. It might not be useful to folks in the current version, and that's why we want to do these workshops to figure out how can we improve this user interface and the kind of like the functionality for people to make it actually directly useful. But there's also a very concrete opportunity right now that I won't speak too much about, but I am currently working with some lawyers who are trying to leverage time series heat data to fight for a prison in a particular state to be closed, and short of that, which they think will not happen because this is a red state that we're talking about, fighting for at least some new policies around the housing of heat sensitive individuals. So people who have pre-existing conditions, elderly people, people like that. So that was a really kind of exciting opportunity to get to contribute to a real opportunity to hopefully improve the material conditions of people inside. And we want to do more. Okay, the other questions. Academics, yeah, I definitely don't think everybody needs to research this. Um, I think that there are roles for everybody to play, no matter kind of where you are, whether you're an architect, or a biologist. There are things you can be doing to be supporting movement building. That includes donating, mutual aid. It includes amplifying organizations like Land Together, organizations like Fight Toxic Prisons, whenever they're hosting events or doing a campaign and or doing a phone zap, participating in those phone zaps. I think there's also a big opportunity for academics who, have certain privileges. If you're a professor, especially if you're a tenured professor or an administrator, to help support movements on your campus, whether it's student movements fighting for divestment from Israel, because this is part of the broader military and prison industrial complex. That issue is part of what we're talking about today. So there are many things that academics can do that are different than just doing, direct research on the problem itself. Oh, one more, resistance. Um, definitely face resistance. I was in an engineering department for my PhD, which yeah, that brought a lot of challenges for me. But we did it and I'm done. And I kind of just, I played the game. I gave them what they wanted in some portions of my dissertation, and I did my own thing for the other portions, and I think that just has to do with kind of strategy and making sure you don't piss off the wrong people so that I could get this degree and hopefully have more influence and capacity to do the work that I want to do that I hope will help improve, other people's lives.
Perfect. Honestly, there are still like really great questions in the Q&A, but I do want to make sure that we have time to highlight any like current projects, which I feel like y'all have spoken on a little bit, but like what can we here, we're based in kind of the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic in general, do with any of your organizations, and how do you want us to kind of leave here today with an action item? Ivy, we'll start with you.
Thank you. So, I think that there's extremely like tangible ways, right, that you can connect with Land Together. You can be a volunteer. I think there will be a link that will be shared, right, with how to volunteer and donate if you have a family member, formerly incarcerated individual who is interested in joining um, our prison environmental advisory board. Our application is still open. And I think what's really important for me is to really set the stage for the issue really at hand, which is understanding. I think that we've all heard today how, incarcerated individuals are disproportionately harmed by the effects of climate change and extreme weather events, right? And they're often overlooked when we have conversations about environmental justice. And really, I think what stuck out to me the most is understanding that there are more comprehensive rules relating to how jurisdictions evacuate house pets than there are to protecting people in prisons during environmental emergencies. There are right now no comprehensive laws protecting those incarcerated individuals when there is an environmental emergency. In California, our incarcerated population is affected by, of course, extreme heat, extreme cold, flooding, wildfires, and smoke. And in California, where we know that there are fires, it's common. 24% of the state's prisons sit within 5 miles of fire hazard zones. Our prison population is also affected by poor air quality, contaminated water, power outages, among other climate change, and environmental quality issues, right? I've explained that, in my experience, I go in every week when the prison allows me, where I facilitate programming, and sometimes it's as deep as environmental justice within a community. Sometimes it's about the biology of plants. It varies, right? But I know that I have guys that have just come outside from being in 106 degrees. They had just come inside again from spending the night pushing, they told me, at least 6 inches of water out of their cell because they don't have a currently functioning roof, right? Still showing up, working with individuals, right, who are freezing, who are hot, who are wet, who see the smoke from the fires in the distance and are scared that it's coming towards them and are limited in their information to know what they can do, what they can do about it. There is a feeling of helplessness. And when I do this work, I get the question all the time because as we know, we live in an extremely punitive um, society, which is, why the hell does this matter? Why does this matter? Why should I care? Right? We should care because there is 45%, sorry, of individual Americans have a close relative that is currently incarcerated. And 90% of individuals who are incarcerated in prison will get out. They will go out, which is we are forcing people who are in temporary situations to experience a deep sense of dehumanization, deep exposure. And this is not just about us as individuals, right? This affects a lot of people, nearly half of Americans. We should care. That means if your friends, they have someone in prison, we should care about this. And the way that you could help, the only way that we can move forward is to think about decarcerating. We've done this before. We've done this with COVID. They were able to decrease the prison population by 11% during COVID, during an emergency. It is possible. That is the way forward. So, yes, please volunteer at Land Together. We love our volunteers. I've never worked in a prison before. I worked within this space. It is all the things that people would think it is, which is it's a prison. But the clarity that I was able to gain about life, about humans, about being able to understand that you are not your worst action. You are not that person. Being able to repeat that in work makes you repeat that in life. And I want other people to experience that. And if you can't be in a prison, that's okay. Donate. And if you have a family member, which we know that 45% of Americans do, who've been to a prison, tell them to apply for this advisory board to be a part of our team. And if you are at home or like, hey, none of that applies to me, think about what it means to think about abolition of our communities, of our mind, when we decarcerate our minds, when we learn not to be so punitive to the individuals that are around us, when we express empathy, when we express compassion as the foundation of who we are. Maybe that's simply what you can do. Instead of cussing out that person who cut you in line at the Starbucks, maybe it's letting it slide. Maybe it's having just additional space to, listen to someone talk about their lives. That's what that looks like. But yes, that's the end of my spiel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ivy. Ufma, what can people do with, I guess, if you can talk specifically about the Toxic Prisons Mapping Project, and then I'll let Richie talk about Fight Toxic Prisons.
Yeah, so we have a contact page where we're open to a number of things. If you want to just experience it yourself and leave feedback and say, hey, this is really crappy, y'all need to improve this user interface, we're open to that. If you are a researcher and you want to help actually, contribute to the, research activities with us, we're open to that. If you're a community organizer and you want to, be part of kind of, yeah, more the deeper collaboration, informing this, learning how to use this, or, invite us to run a demo, to share how it could be used, we're open to that. So definitely reach out however ways you think that you might be interested. And someone also asked about kind of helping to share narratives or conduct narratives, or conduct the interviews with formerly incarcerated people. Definitely would appreciate more support with that, depending on kind of, who you are, what your background is. We're gonna vet everybody that we collaborate with to see what your politics are, and like if you're actually aligned with the things that we're trying to do. But generally, we are open to, working with folks, and we'd love to hear you reach out.
Awesome, thanks. And what could people do to support the work that Fight Toxic Prisons is doing?
Have undersold y'all on the work of Fight Toxic Prisons a bit. Like, I think we've only focused pretty much on the collaborative work with UFOMA and the mapping project and a little bit of the work that we do with disaster response. But one of the things that we do best, we close prisons pretty damn well. Like, one of the things that we do really, really well is that we get stuff done, and we close prisons really well. So one of the ways folks can get involved, we often do, I think Foma mentioned about apps and things like that. So plugging into any of our phones apps, but we also are really focused on this intersection of we're really focused on this intersection of environmental disasters, prison abolition, climate chaos, and specifically working with folks on the inside. So we've worked with graduate students, we've worked with college students, undergraduate students, and PhD students to like add a grassroots perspective to different research projects. So if folks are interested in that, I can't guarantee the capacity to help everyone, but definitely, like if we can't do it, we always can like fit folks in with other people who are doing it. And just invite us to a school or area near you so we can close things together, honestly. Yeah, like yeah, so we got our WordPress, and then you can always hit us up at our Gmail too at Fight Toxic Prisons at Fight Toxic Prisons Fight Toxic Prisons Gmail. Fight Toxic Prison at gmail.com. Yeah, I was slipping with the words on that one, but yeah, inquiries, we do it all.
Perfect. And I did see in the Q&A a couple people wanting to reach out to one or more of y'all. So definitely encouraging everyone to grab those links so that you can stay connected. And then the socials and stuff are all on those websites if they have them. We're kind of nearing the end of our time together, and I want to again thank y'all so much for this amazing conversation. I really do appreciate the way that each of you brings such a different and important perspective to this work. And as I mentioned, I've put those links into the chat for y'all to grab, and want to make sure that y'all are, staying in this conversation. My hope is that this is kind of an introduction to perhaps an issue that you didn't already know based on your work with the Petey Greene program. And so to wrap us up, we're going to share some kind of updates and event things for the Petey Greene program, and then we'll thank everyone again and wrap up there. So
We got to
first,
mention one more action step. This is actually
please do it.
super important.
Okay,
All right,
do it.
last action step that folks can always do. If you go to our website, we correspond with a lot of incarcerated folks. So writing to a political prisoner, writing to incarcerated folks is always a bit of it. Because I only mention that because, like, as we were talking about earlier, ways to like fight repression, to like do some of those things. Not all folks are able to use phone calls, especially in a state like Texas. So I think it's essential to just have that letter writing component as a part of your activism and organizing work. So corresponding with any of the list of environmental prisoners and political prisoners that we have on our website is good, or other folks as well too. And if you need tutorials and stuff like that, always happy to put folks in contact with how those things are ran, because I think that's very vital work to all of this. And it's stuff that students can do. It's something that you can do from your seat at home. So yeah, that's my spiel on letter writing.
Love it. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so I do want to encourage everyone to register for our upcoming annual 5K. So on April 12th in 4 locations, Boston, Philadelphia, DC, and Princeton, we're going to gather together to run/walk for educational justice, as well as community building and activities. Don't forget that if you're a volunteer, you have a discounted rate, and if you're a current or former PGP student, you can join us for free. So scan that QR code if you're in one of those 4 places and want to join our 5K. In other running news, we are now an official partner of the NYC Marathon and have an application for interested runners in that. So if you're in New York, which isn't one of our places with a 5K, and you want to just run a little longer, New York City Marathon is where to do that. And the work that we do here at the Petey Greene program is made possible through generous donations from individuals and groups. Please consider donating to the PGP if you haven't already. And if you can't donate, consider sharing the link to our donation page on your social media accounts to help signal boost the work that we are doing here together. I think something that we've heard from all of the people on this call is that it takes kind of a lot of support to do this work, both financially and in the actual on the ground work. And so we're always happy to find ways for you to plug into whatever it is that you can do to support that. And finally, you'll all receive a survey to provide feedback on tonight's webinar. I will read every single feedback form. I really do value your input and want to use it to inform what kinds of justice education series webinars we do in the future. So please fill that out. The survey will appear in your browser when the webinar ends, and you'll also get it in an email follow-up tomorrow. Okay. I want to thank everyone again, both audience members, for your attention and engagement, all of those great questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. And then another huge thank you to our panelists. We greatly appreciate you sharing your insights. And hey, I did it, 7:30. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your evening. Bye.